During the final months of World War II, a U.S. reconnaissance unit discovers a hidden enemy facility where captured female resistance fighters and civilians have been imprisoned under horrific conditions. When American forces breach the compound, they find dozens of women confined in makeshift cages, malnourished and traumatized. As the soldiers work to liberate them, one guard's gentle words, "You're safe now," become the first sign of hope these survivors have experienced in months. The persistent drizzle of a late spring rain slicked the ancient cobbles of the Ardennes, mirroring the leaden sky above. Each drop seemed to amplify the chill that had settled deep into the bones of PFC Miller and his three-man reconnaissance patrol. The skeletal silhouettes of bombed-out farmhouses, gaunt and broken, stood like silent sentinels against a bruised, gray horizon. With every rhythmic crunch of mud under his boots, Miller felt the monotonous rhythm of the war echoing the weary beat of his own heart, a dull, aching throb that had defined the past few months of his young life. The air hung heavy, thick and cloying, saturated with the lingering scent of damp earth, the distant, acrid tang of wood smoke, and the metallic, almost unbearable weariness of endless conflict. Victory, they were told, was in the air, a whisper on the wind, a promise of home and peace. But here, in this forgotten, desolate corner of newly liberated Belgium, it felt like a ghost, an elusive hope that had yet to materialize, a cruel illusion in a landscape still scarred by violence. As the Allied forces had swept across Europe, celebrating victory and the triumph of liberation, they had inadvertently left behind pockets of darkness, places where the war's most chilling secrets still festered, hidden in plain sight. These were secrets that would soon reveal humanity's terrifying, boundless capacity for cruelty, yet also, unexpectedly, its equally boundless, unbreakable spirit. What untold stories from World War II, lying beneath the surface of history, do you believe still hold the power to shock and inspire us today, challenging our complacency and forcing us to confront the enduring shadows of the past? Obersturmführer Karl Fischer, a man whose meticulously pressed SS uniform always seemed incongruously crisp amidst the mud and decay of the rapidly collapsing Eastern Front, surveyed his makeshift detention facility with cold, dispassionate eyes. He walked the narrow, damp corridors of the underground bunker, the precise, almost ritualistic click of his polished boots echoing with chilling regularity against the rough-hewn stone walls, a stark counterpoint to the absolute, suffocating silence that pervaded the air. To him, the figures confined within the crude wooden and wire cages lining these subterranean walls were not individuals. They were statistical units, biological specimens, mere aberrations to be controlled, to be broken, and ultimately to be disposed of according to the dictates of a dying ideology. His belief, etched into the very core of his being by years of fanatical indoctrination, was one of absolute control, total dehumanization, and an unshakable commitment to what he perceived as ideological purity. He saw their suffering not as an unfortunate byproduct of war, nor as a moral failing, but as a justified and necessary means to a grander, more abstract end, a purification process for a corrupted world, even as that world crumbled in fire and ruin around him. The Reich, he maintained, would rise again, phoenix-like from the ashes, and these lesser beings would either serve its resurgence as broken instruments or be purged from the new order, their existence an unacceptable stain. The constant, insidious, damp chill permeated everything in this wretched place, clinging to the rough-hewn stone walls, seeping into the very bones of the prisoners, a cold that no blanket or fire could ever banish. The air itself seemed to suffocate, thick and cloying, saturated with the unshakable stench of stale food, festering human waste, and the raw, animalistic fear that had so thoroughly stained the very stone of the dungeon. Distant, barely audible whimpers, often dismissed by Fischer with a dismissive wave of his hand as mere animal noises, occasionally broke the profound silence, only to be swallowed again by the overwhelming, crushing despair. The harsh, metallic clang of a heavy steel door, operated by a perpetually grim-faced guard, sealing off this subterranean world from the one above, was a constant, terrifying reminder of their imprisonment, a finality that crushed the faintest flicker of hope. This place was a tomb, not merely for bodies but for souls. PFC. Miller, a young man whose face was still too soft, too unscarred for the profound horrors he had already witnessed, led his three-man reconnaissance patrol through the desolate, rain-swept landscape. They were on a slight detour, following a barely legible line on an old, crinkled map, an unexpected deviation from their main objective. The map, salvaged from a captured German officer, indicated an isolated, fortified building that seemed to crouch low against the bleak horizon, an anomaly in an otherwise abandoned stretch of rural land. The building itself appeared deserted, a hollow shell of brick and splintered timber, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the ravaged world. Yet as they approached, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a low, persistent hum, drew them closer. It wasn't the wind whistling through broken panes, nor the rhythmic drumming of the rain. It was something else, something unnatural, a barely perceptible vibration that spoke of hidden activity. They discovered a heavy, camouflaged door, cunningly hidden beneath a tangle of thorny bushes and debris, leading ominously downward into the very earth. With a shared, uneasy glance, Sergeant Davies, the grizzled squad leader, gave the terse nod, and they began the arduous task of breaching it. The protesting creak of rusty hinges, eerily loud in the profound silence, shattered the stillness. They descended into an echoing darkness, the beam of Miller's flashlight cutting through the gloom like a hesitant, probing finger. The air grew immediately colder, heavier, charged with an inexplicable mounting dread. Then the beam caught it, rows upon rows of crude wooden and wire cages, crammed tightly into a dimly lit, foul-smelling chamber. The sight stole the breath from Miller's lungs, a sudden, violent expulsion of air. A collective gasp of horror escaped the hardened soldiers, each man rooted to the spot, their combat-honed instincts momentarily paralyzed, disbelief warring with a sickening, dawning realization. Miller's breath hitched, a knot of revulsion and cold, seething rage tightening in his gut. Before them were dozens of women, some mere girls, their bodies skeletal, their eyes wide with a terror so profound, so absolute, it seemed to absorb all light and hope. They huddled together, shrunken, starved, huddled like animals in squalid confinement, a silent, damning testament to unimaginable, prolonged suffering. The initial shock of the visual was a physical gut punch, an assault on every sense, an attack on every humane instinct. They meticulously counted 37 women, ranging in age from late teens to early 20s, each confined to a space no larger than 2 square meters, many too weak to stand upright, their muscles atrophied from disuse. On a grimy, overturned wooden crate nearby, amidst scattered human waste and a few crusts of moldy bread, a hastily abandoned logbook lay open. The entries, scrawled in harsh, angular German script, detailed interrogation subjects, Section F, with chilling bureaucratic precision. Alongside each name were dehumanizing marks and classifications like recalcitrant, broken, disposed. One entry, dated mere days prior in a chillingly detached hand, coldly noted, Subject F14, no further use, reassigned. The implication, left unspoken but screamingly clear, hung heavy in the dank air, a dark shroud over the already horrifying scene, suggesting a fate far worse than simple imprisonment. As the soldiers, still reeling from the shock, began to cautiously, almost fearfully approach the cages, a faint rhythmic scratching sound drew Miller's attention. It was almost lost amidst the low moans, the faint rustle of desperate movement, and the pervasive stench, but it persisted. A tiny, defiant noise. He found its source in a cage near the far wall, where one woman, barely conscious, her eyes glazed with fever and exhaustion, was tracing something into the dirt floor with a fingernail. It was a tiny, almost invisible cross, crudely rendered but unmistakable, a desperate, defiant act of faith, a silent prayer etched into the very earth of her prison, a mark of humanity in a place designed to strip it away. The deplorable conditions they observed spoke volumes, revealing a calculated system of deprivation, designed not just to punish, but to utterly break the human spirit. Each cage contained a single, overflowing, filthy bucket for waste, the stench of which mingled with the damp earth to create an almost unbearable atmosphere. Evidence meticulously gathered suggested they were fed barely once every 2 days, a watery, nutrient-deficient gruel that offered minimal sustenance, just enough to prolong their suffering without allowing them the release of death. The average weight loss among the survivors was later estimated at a staggering 40–50% of their original body mass, a horrifying testament to prolonged, deliberate starvation. Tucked into a tiny crevice of the stone wall near the cage, partially obscured by moss and grime, PFC, Miller discovered a small, folded piece of paper, grimy with dirt and moisture. On it, drawn with a trembling hand, was a crude sketch of a wilting flower, and below it 2 initials, ML plus JS. It was a silent, heartbreaking testament to a friendship, a lost love, a fleeting flicker of ordinary human connection amidst the overwhelming horror, a memory clutched desperately in the face of oblivion. Sergeant Davies, his usually tough, battle-hardened exterior visibly cracked, turned away, fighting back a wave of nausea and the burning sting of unshed tears. His knuckles were white as he gripped his rifle, the cold steel a stark, unyielding contrast to the raw, uncontrolled emotion welling within him. "God help them," he whispered, his voice thick with a raw, undeniable ache, a prayer torn from the depths of his soul. One woman, her eyes like bottomless pits hollowed by fear and malnutrition, recoiled violently as Miller tentatively, gently, offered her a canteen of fresh water. Her sudden, convulsive flinching, a desperate shying away from his outstretched hand, spoke volumes of a deep-seated insidious trauma related to being touched or even approached by another human being. It was a stark and immediate realization for the soldiers. The psychological damage inflicted upon these women went far beyond mere physical starvation. Their bodies might be gaunt, their bones prominent under translucent skin, but their spirits, their very minds, bore scars even deeper, far more complex and insidious than any physical wound. The facility's records, discovered later in a hidden compartment behind a loose stone, chillingly indicated that over a period of just 6 months, 18 other subjects had been transferred, or, more disturbingly, euphemistically, eliminated. This stark, brutal number hinted at a much larger, more systematic network of abuse and extermination, suggesting that this particular bunker was but one small, horrifying cog in a far vaster, more terrifying machine of calculated cruelty. Among the scattered, discarded papers, a crumpled, half-burned German directive outlined security protocols for female partisans, a chillingly clinical document that emphasized psychological degradation and extreme isolation as highly effective methods for pacification. It was a bureaucratic blueprint for the systematic destruction of the human will, CPL. Jenkins, usually the most stoic and unflappable member of the patrol, unable to contain the rising tide of revulsion, turned away, retching quietly and uncontrollably in a corner. The sight, the stench, and the horrifying implications of what these women had endured were simply too much to bear. The sheer calculated cruelty, the methodical dismantling of human beings, was an overwhelming, soul-crushing revelation. Among the silent, broken figures, one woman older than the others, perhaps in her late 20s, though the torment had aged her far beyond her chronological years, leaving her looking decades older, displayed a flicker of remarkable defiance in her eyes. Her gaunt face, though lined with suffering, held a certain silent strength, an unyielding resilience that hinted at a spirit stubbornly unbroken despite the relentless torment. She was later identified as Anna, a former French resistance cell leader, a woman whose will had been tested in fire and had refused to yield. Even now, amidst the wreckage of her dignity, she subtly, almost imperceptibly, tried to shield a younger, more fragile girl in her cage from the soldiers' scrutinizing gaze, a primal, maternal instinct surviving the darkest of conditions. The women's bodies bore not only the unmistakable marks of severe malnutrition, but also the telltale signs of sleep deprivation and prolonged stress positions, their limbs unnaturally contorted, their joints swollen. These were not random acts of casual brutality. They were the calculated, precise outcomes of systematic psychological torture, meticulously designed to break their will and spirit without necessarily leaving overt, easily identifiable physical scars that might provoke immediate questions. Yet the invisible wounds, carved into their minds and souls, were far deeper, far more debilitating. A hidden compartment in one cage, a clever little niche concealed behind a loose floorboard, pried open by a curious soldier, revealed a tiny, crudely sharpened piece of metal, a shard of a tin plate, honed into a desperate, razor-thin weapon. It was found clutched in the hand of a deceased young woman, her fingers still locked in a death grip, a poignant and heartbreaking testament to a last, desperate means of self-defense or escape, a final, futile act of resistance against an overwhelming, crushing force. Miller, overwhelmed by a potent, burning mix of anger and profound sorrow, forced himself to meet Anna's gaze. He offered her a small, reassuring nod, a silent promise of help, a desperate attempt to convey through his eyes what his words, in their strange, unfamiliar tongue, could not yet articulate. He hoped she understood. The soldiers initially believed they had stumbled upon a forgotten makeshift prison, a desperate last-ditch measure by a collapsing regime to hold its perceived enemies. The grim conditions, the overt starvation, the obvious rampant abuse, all pointed to a brutal, but perhaps unplanned or ad hoc detention center. However, as they began to thoroughly search the facility after securing the area, methodically turning over every stone, they unearthed a chilling revelation that completely flipped their initial assumptions on their head, revealing a horror far more calculated. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in what appeared to be the officers' quarters, carefully sealed in a waterproof satchel, they discovered a series of meticulously organized files and highly confidential reports. These documents, written in formal, precise German and stamped with the ominous insignia of the SS, detailed not just a simple detention center, but a deliberate, scientifically engineered experimental facility. The reports outlined Project Valkyrie, a top-secret psychological warfare initiative. Its sinister purpose was to systematically break down and then reprogram female resistance fighters and civilians, not for immediate execution, but for a far more insidious and long-term goal: to turn them into compliant, broken tools for propaganda, espionage, or forced labor in the collapsing Reich. The methods outlined were terrifyingly precise: extreme isolation, targeted sensory deprivation, calculated malnutrition designed to weaken both body and mind, and systematic psychological torment, all aimed at eroding their identity, their will, and their very humanity. This discovery fundamentally shifted the understanding of the horror they had found. These women weren't simply awaiting execution or transfer. They were being meticulously prepared for a fate potentially far worse than death, a future as utterly dehumanized, emotionally castrated instruments of the Third Reich. The horror intensified exponentially with the realization that this was not merely brutality, but a planned, scientific endeavor to systematically enslave the human mind, to shatter souls with cold, clinical efficiency. The immediate challenge for the liberating soldiers, once the initial shock subsided, was not a military one, but a profound ethical and psychological quandary. They were not simply freeing prisoners of war. They were confronting the shattered fragments of human beings, each one a testament to unimaginable cruelty. How, Miller wondered, could one even begin to repair such profound, systemic trauma? The women recoiled from any attempt at touch, flinched violently at sudden movements, their eyes holding a raw, untamed fear that mirrored that of hunted animals cornered in a trap. This wasn't merely a medical crisis of starvation and physical injury. It was a profound crisis of humanity, a gaping wound in the very fabric of their souls. The ethical dilemma loomed immense and immediate. Should they prioritize the women's immediate physical needs and comfort, providing nourishment and warmth, or should they cautiously attempt to extract potential intelligence from those who had endured such horrors, information that could save other lives? The very act of questioning, even gently, carried an immense risk of re-traumatization, of further shattering already fragile minds. The sheer scale of psychological damage was unprecedented in their experience. Later, in the grim aftermath of the war, extensive studies by psychologists and medical professionals revealed that survivors of such systematic dehumanization and psychological torture often faced decades of excruciating, complex psychological recovery. An estimated 70% experience severe, chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD symptoms, often compounded by dissociative disorders and profound trust issues, a rate far higher and more complex than that observed in conventional combat veterans who had witnessed only physical conflict. Their physical wounds, while severe, might eventually heal with time and care, but the indelible scars etched onto their souls would remain a constant aching presence, a phantom limb of their former selves, a perpetual reminder of what they had endured. The soldiers, particularly Miller, began to grasp the true, terrifying weight of their newfound role. It extended far beyond mere rescue. It meant providing the foundational care for an unprecedented psychological recovery, a monumental task for which they were utterly, tragically unprepared. Their mission had shifted, irrevocably, from one of battlefield liberation to an impossible yet utterly essential act of profound, sustained empathy. The climax was not a thunderous battle of gunfire and explosions, not a heroic charge against an armed enemy, but a profound emotional set-piece, a quiet confrontation with deeply ingrained fear and paralyzing distrust. PFC. Miller knew instinctively that he couldn't rush this. The profound terror etched into the women's eyes was a barrier more formidable than any barbed wire, more impenetrable than any concrete wall. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured and precise. His rifle, a weapon of war and intimidation, remained slung across his back, its menacing presence deliberately downplayed. His hands, though rough and calloused from battle, were held open, palms outward, in a universal ancient gesture of peace and vulnerability. His uniform, a symbol of liberation to him, was undeniably a uniform of oppression to them, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had to transcend that symbol. He knelt slowly, deliberately before Anna's cage, lowering himself to her eye level, reducing his imposing figure. His voice, usually firm and authoritative in combat, was now a soft, reassuring rumble, the words carefully chosen, intended to convey nothing but safety, kindness, and an unconditional offer of help. He searched his memory for any kindness, any gentleness from his own mother or sister, trying to channel that pure, unconditional care into his voice, to imbue his words with a warmth that could penetrate the icy shell of her fear. "You're safe now," he repeated, not just a simple statement but a plea, an offering of his own humanity in the face of theirs, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm of their shared horror. The sheer oppressive silence of the moment was deafening, broken only by the incessant drip of moisture from the cold stone ceiling, the ragged, uneven breaths of the women, and the frantic pounding of Miller's own heart. From Miller's perspective, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat of urgency intertwined with a paralyzing fear of doing something wrong, of shattering the incredibly fragile trust he so desperately needed to build. He watched Anna's face, her eyes wide and haunted, searching for any flicker of understanding, any hint of acceptance. Every muscle in his body tensed, preparing for a sudden movement, a panicked cry, a violent rejection that would send him reeling. The excruciating seconds stretched into an eternity, then an infinitesimal shift. The immense gut-wrenching relief that washed over him when, after what felt like an endless, agonizing wait, her hand, skeletal and trembling, tentatively reached out, a barely perceptible gesture towards his outstretched canteen, was almost overwhelming, a physical release of tension. It was a silent testament to a decision, a monumental act of courage that transcended language. For Anna, the internal struggle was a profound, almost cosmic battle, a brutal clash between deeply ingrained survival instincts and an impossible, bewildering glimmer of hope. Every fiber of her being screamed danger. She had been conditioned, systematically starved, brutally beaten, psychologically tortured, her spirit systematically eroded. Her entire world had become one of unremitting pain, a constant, brutal reminder that anyone in a uniform, any man with authority, was an enemy, a source of torment. Yet this soldier's voice was undeniably different. Soft, not harsh, not demanding, not threatening. His eyes, though weary from war, held a profound pity, not malice, not cold indifference. He knelt, an act of submission, not dominance, an unexpected gesture of respect. The scent of him was different too, not the acrid, stale smell of her captors, but something cleaner, perhaps even human. The decision to step forward, to accept the canteen, was not just about quenching a desperate thirst. It was an act of monumental courage, a reclaiming of agency, a terrifying, desperate leap of faith into the unknown, choosing the faintest possibility of hope over the crushing certainty of learned despair. It was the crucial, terrifying first step on an unimaginably long, arduous path back to humanity, a step that defied all logic and all conditioned fear. This single, quiet interaction, played out in the claustrophobic confines of a forgotten dungeon in a world consumed by war, became a pivotal historical moment, the silent, profound reclaiming of humanity from the abyss. It underscored the profound, unfathomable cost of war, the terrifying depths of human depravity, and, in stark, beautiful contrast, the enduring, transformative power of a single act of kindness, a moment of profound empathy. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of careful, agonizing activity, yet imbued with a newfound sense of purpose. The painstaking process of moving the women out of the oppressive, stench-filled bunker began, each step slow, deliberate, and fraught with emotional fragility. They were gently wrapped in warm blankets, scavenged from their packs and any available supplies, providing a physical comfort that had been absent for months. Sips of fresh water, pure and life-giving, were offered cautiously, followed by small, nutrient-rich field rations, which many struggled to keep down. The initial, profound silence of the liberated was gradually broken, not by shouts of joy, but by quiet, shuddering sobs, and the gentle rustle of aid workers moving among them. The first difficult attempts at communication began, often through simple gestures, hesitant drawings, or fragmented whispered words, as a kind-faced military medic, Lieutenant Evans, a woman whose calm demeanor was a balm, tried to assess their physical and mental state. The journey, everyone instinctively knew, had only just begun. The long-tail ripple of this liberation extended far beyond that dark, forgotten bunker. Anna, along with a few others who possessed the strength, both physical and spiritual, to speak of their ordeal, was eventually moved through Allied field hospitals, then on to specialized care facilities established to address the profound and complex psychological trauma she had endured. It was an arduous, agonizing journey of rebuilding lives, painstakingly piecing together shattered identities, and grappling daily with memories that threatened to consume her. She had to learn, painstakingly, to rediscover trust in a world that had betrayed her so utterly, not just in the hands of her captors, but in the silence of those who might have known. Some of the women, finding an unexpected strength in their shared, horrific experience, dedicated their lives to activism, campaigning fiercely for human rights and against the atrocities they had suffered, ensuring their voices and the voices of their fallen sisters would never be silenced. Others found solace in rebuilding families, in quiet, ordinary lives lived far from the echoes of war, seeking to reclaim the normalcy that had been stolen from them. But all of them, every single one, carried the indelible mark of their ordeal, a silent, profound testament to their unimaginable resilience and their enduring suffering. The soldiers, particularly Miller, were forever haunted by what they had witnessed. The images of those caged women, their hollow eyes and skeletal forms, were seared into their minds, their understanding of humanity forever altered, their youthful innocence irrevocably lost to the profound shadows of the war. Miller found himself questioning the very nature of good and evil, realizing that true heroism often lay not in killing, but in the quiet, compassionate act of saving. He carried the memory of Anna's tentative reach for the canteen as a sacred, painful burden, a reminder of both the worst and best of humanity. The modern echo of such atrocities resonates chillingly in our contemporary world, a stark reminder that history, though it may not repeat itself exactly, often rhymes with terrifying precision. The systematic dehumanization witnessed in that Belgian bunker finds direct, harrowing parallels in present-day struggles against human trafficking, where countless individuals are stripped of their freedom, their dignity, and their very identity for exploitation, reduced to commodities. It mirrors, with chilling accuracy, the horrific accounts of gender-based violence in conflict zones around the globe, from the besieged villages of Syria and the shattered landscapes of Ukraine, to the forgotten corners of Myanmar and Sudan, where women and girls are systematically used as weapons of war, their bodies and minds brutalized, their spirits targeted for destruction. The meticulous methods of Project Valkyrie, designed with cold, clinical precision to break the human spirit and rebuild it in the image of tyranny, are terrifyingly reflected in the tactics employed by authoritarian regimes, extremist groups, and even sophisticated cults today. They seek to control vast populations or vulnerable individuals through fear, psychological isolation, systematic deprivation, and relentless psychological manipulation, exploiting vulnerabilities to create compliant subjects. The mechanisms of dehumanization, though evolved and often cloaked in new ideologies or technologies, persist with an alarming regularity, making the lessons learned from that forgotten bunker in World War II terrifyingly, heartbreakingly relevant. The fight for human rights, for dignity, for the fundamental recognition of every individual's inherent worth, is far from over. It is a continuous, relentless battle, and the memory of Anna and the others serves as a stark, urgent call to action, a reminder that vigilance and empathy are our strongest weapons against the darkness. Amidst the ruins of war, these women, caged like animals, their spirits systematically targeted for destruction, found their humanity, their very souls, reclaimed through a single courageous act of kindness, a moment of profound connection that bridged an abyss of suffering. Their story stands as an undeniable, powerful testament to the enduring power of empathy, resilience, and the sheer indomitability of the human spirit over the darkest forces of evil. What does it truly mean to liberate a soul, not just a body? And how do we, in our modern world, continue to fight the insidious, shape-shifting forces that tirelessly seek to strip away human dignity, to dehumanize, to cage the spirit? If the untold stories of unimaginable resilience, of profound human connection, and of the enduring struggle against darkness from history move you, if they challenge your perceptions and stir your conscience, then hit that subscribe button. Join us as we continue to uncover more chapters that not only enlighten, but also profoundly challenge what you thought you knew about our past, reminding us that the echoes of history demand our constant attention and our unwavering commitment to humanity.